with this wind blowing while we're talking, it's coming from my back, and with all the heat going up to the curved roof of the tunnel, it has to come down again, and this wind blows it back into the cab. And that's why we had the respirators. When we come through Adamstown, they'd give us respirators, a hood and gloves for this tunnel, because the tunnel was that hot with the engine. And then when the guard was walking up, we'd hook our respirators up to the air tap on the engine and put a wet rag in the respirator so we get cool air. Now, in the nor'easter blowing, it was very, very hot in there, and we would always put this gear on. The fireman, if it got too hot, could lift up a steel plate that went over the gap between the engine and tender, and he could put his head down there and get cold air. But the driver wasn't able to, because he had to be at the controls to keep the train moving. And as the guard put more brakes on, it was harder steaming and going slow. It was very hot. There has been known in the records for drivers to have their eyebrows singed. It'd be that hot. The other winds weren't too bad. A southerly wind blowing, we'd never get the respirators out because we didn't need them, because the wind would blow the heat out in front of you. And the heat that came was all the heat that went out of the funnel of the engine, and no smoke, because the fireman had the fire set that way. When we got down to Adamstown, we'd give the respirators back to them and then take the train down to the relief road at near the Broadmeadow Yard, so as the fireman could take the brakes off. Coming through on the engines, I'm not sure just how much space there was above the engine, but on the side of the engine, you had just barely enough to get out if there was trouble. And then on the walls of the tunnel, you'll see little hideaways where if you was caught there when a train came, you could step back in there out of the road. All coal trains, up until my retirement in 1989, all coal trains on this line were non-air. What we mean by non-air is there was no control over the brakes on the wagons from the engine. Now on the way back, we'd have to stop our engine around about here, because the grade in front of us, there is a 1 in 40 grade in parts, and the engine brakes wouldn't hold the load. So we'd stop here and the guard would walk up, and then when he got here, we'd go slowly through the tunnel, and he'd put the handbrake on each wagon to assist us. When we got through the tunnel, there's a straight stretch where we'd stop the train, and then if we had trouble stopping it, we'd send the fireman back to put the brakes on harder. Steam engines were a battle. It depends on where you were and what coal you had. When you come here, you got the coal from up at the coalfield, Cessnock. It was like dynamite. The only trouble is the coal here used to burn away to a fine ash, and you had to keep putting more in because the ash would fall through the ash pan. We're coming up here one day, I was only fireman at the time, and the driver said, "Oh God," we got halfway up from Adamstown, he said, "Oh God, look at the tender we've got," was what we used to call a 1-2 tender. And as we come past these railings, sparks went everywhere. The tender rubbed against the iron railings. Beautiful sparkling.